Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. There is a somewhat famous saying that goes, quote, "Those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it." There are several versions of this quote, but they all boil down to the same thing. The message is obviously to learn from the mistakes of the past so as not to repeat them. The key word condemned is sometimes replaced with doomed or destined, but the suggestion is always that ignoring the past will inevitably lead to something bad. It is only by studying the past and reflecting on whatever problems come up that we can rectify things and make a better present or future for ourselves. While there is no doubt of the wisdom contained in this classic quote, it does make one wonder why the focus on the past is so negative. Wasn't there anything good in the past that perhaps should be repeated? For that matter, why is this rule so fixed in fate that we are doomed or condemned or destined to do the same thing as was done in the past? Couldn't we encounter the same situation and do something different? Well, nobody says that this rule is the human equivalent of a law of physics. It is certainly suggested here that we are so set in our ways that this doom can only be avoided by learning our lessons from history. Riding along with quotes like this is a sense that we either are or should be always progressing forward as we go through history. The present is invariably better than the past, and the future should be better than the present. There is simply no possibility of things being otherwise. This is such a feature of the human outlook, at least for the relatively recent past, that it is taken as an article of faith. The idea that things may have been better in the past is taken as simply ridiculous. The reason this assumption is so universal is that we have the current benefits of science and technology, which our predecessors, of course, did not. Who would want to live in a past that didn't have electricity or motorized transportation or computers? Who would want to live without air conditioning or central heating? Who would want to even go back to the days of listening to the radio or talking on a phone that is attached to the wall? Hence the assumption that life must always be a journey forward to some promised land. This week's Parsha is another double. The two names are Matot, which means tribes, and Masei, which means journeys. These are the last two Parshas in the book of Numbers, and they are frequently read at the same week. They actually have very little to do with one another, so it is a bit surprising that they frequently come together, but such is the fate of certain Parshas. The first, Matot, deals with various subjects such as the fulfillment or annulment of vows, a victorious battle against the border nation of Midian and the dividing of the spoils of war, and the request and response of certain Israelite tribes to remain on the east side of the Jordan River and not enter the Holy Land to fight in the wars of conquest. The second Parsha, Masei, deals primarily with two subjects: the listing of the various journeys the Israelites traveled during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and the borders of the Holy Land. The first of these, the journeys, takes up about half the Parsha, and it is the reason for the name of the Parsha. The list of journeys is a bit strange, as it simply comes up at the beginning of the Parsha with no prior prompting. It is a long list comprising of over 40 stops. It is stated very matter-of-factly, usually with just a place that they left and another place where they encamped. It happens that a good deal of these places are unknown, having no previous reference in the text. This is strange, since if they are listed here, why wouldn't we have heard of them earlier? But from the known places and what took place at them, we can figure out approximately where these other places were and how they fit into the big picture of the journeys through the wilderness. The listing begins with the very first verse of the Parsha. Quote, "These are the journeys of the Israelites who left Egypt in their forces under the guidance of Moshe and Aaron. Moshe wrote the events of their journeys through the word of God, and these are the journeys of those events." It is a somewhat clumsy couple of verses that is by no means easy to translate. What are these events of their journeys? And does that relate to the journeys of those events? Some translate the word for events in any of several other ways, but they all run into the same problem. It seems that this was to be a list of significant stops along the great journey, which itself consisted of both travels and events. The journey was not simply going from one place to another. It had to include all that happened along the way. Without including the events that took place, it would not have been a true recording of the journey. From there, the list goes on and on. It begins with leaving Egypt way back on the 15th day of the first month of the first year. This, of course, was the Exodus, which took place on Passover. Without spending more than a couple verses on this momentous event, the list goes right into a series of minor stops along the way. Included in this series is the wilderness of Sinai. But there is not even a hint of receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. The list simply goes on to read to the next, simply goes on to the next place and the next and the next. After a long series of stops, the list describes a certain mountain as a place where Aaron died. For some reason, the list includes how old Aaron was when he died and follows by mentioning that a certain Canaanite king heard about their approach. Then it goes on with the nondescript list until we find them on the cusp of entering the land just to the east of the Jordan River. We are not told why this long list is here. Why doesn't it include some mention of the giving of the Ten Commandments, or the golden calf, or the building of the tabernacle, or the gathering of the manna? Why is there no mention of the incident with the spies or the rebellion of Korah, or any of the various complaints about lack of water or food? There is no mention of battles or prophecies or even the crossing of the sea. These events are among the most famous in human history by virtue of their being told in the Bible. But in this list, they are missing, and even the places where they happened are only noted in passing. Why should the Torah mention over 20 places that we never hear of either before or after, but neglect to mention the events at Mount Sinai or the crossing of the sea? Why should it devote a verse to some forgotten Canaanite king, but say nothing about the tabernacle? Why does the Torah say that Moshe wrote this list of journeys at the word of God, when they seem to be nothing more than a list of nondescript stopping points along the way, with almost no hint of what took place at any of them? Unfortunately, there are no great answers to these questions. This is simply the list as we have it, and there is nothing we can do to change it. With nothing in the text to help us out, we are going to have to journey outside of the text to delve for an answer. We should use two different approaches: specific historical context and general observations of human experience. Beginning with the historical context, this list was not only written for us today or for those living any time within the past 2,000 years. It was also written for those in biblical times. It was possibly also written for those who made those journeys or their immediate descendants. Those people may have had some recollection of these places and what happened at each one. Even people who lived hundreds of years later in biblical times may have received traditions about those places and knew exactly what events to associate with them. For those people, those places and those events were as real as the latest show on TV is for us. This was their collective experience as a people, and this was their tribal history. We may not relate to history or common experience in the same tribal sense that they did, but we are not them. We cannot assume that however we view history has always been the way that people have viewed history. It is a major feature of Judaism that the biblical past, and specifically the period following the Exodus, was absolutely fundamental to the subsequent nature of the Jewish people and its most important beliefs. The period of the wanderings through the wilderness was almost like an incubator that set the Israelites and their descendants, the Jews, on the course of their destiny. It was those events, those stops along the great journey, that made them who they would become. Those 40 years have never been looked upon as some sort of nondescript intermediate stage in between Egypt and Israel. On the contrary, it was during that time that biblical destiny was set on its path. Reading this list of the journeys through the wilderness may have been seen like reading about the key events in one's childhood. It is in looking back on that glorious and formative time that one understands how one came to be the person or group that they are. This brings us to the second approach. There is a more general idea here that needs to be brought out. At the risk of sounding too cliche-ish, life is a journey. We all know this, even if we have trouble recognizing it or admitting it. While life can be seen as a haphazard series of events that have no meaning or purpose, most people don't want to see their own lives as such. They want to believe that the various steps along the way had some significance, either as individual events or as contributions to the big picture. It really doesn't matter if those steps were good or bad or neutral. The important thing is that they happened and that the experience became embedded in the person. This list of journeys is like a person looking at photographs of their entire life. They may not really remember what was going on in each photo, but they do see themselves in each one and realize that that person was them, and in some undefined way still is. There are baby pictures and childhood pictures and teen pictures and so on. Each one brings something back about the experience of life. They may not cause us to change our course by remembering the past and making sure not to repeat it, but they sure enable us to relive to some degree our life. That alone is absolutely precious and worth all the money in the world. It may be true that those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it, but the same fate might lie in wait for those who do remember the past. We are what we are, a combination of choices and experiences plastered on the nebulous canvas of a soul. Perhaps the most important thing we can pick up on this journey is to understand who we are and how we got here. It is our journey through the wilderness. Shabbat Shalom.